what is the role of white folks in atoning for this history? The number one thing that I recommend when people ask me questions like this is to listen and learn. There's so much value in just listening to Black folks talk about their history, their experience, their memories, and kind of and being quiet and listening instead of kind of interjecting. That is how I have learned so much about Fredericksburg in such a short amount of time. There are people here who are willing to tell their stories and they're ready to tell their stories. So the best thing we can do is listen to them and learn from them. And kind of in the same vein, not just learning their stories, but learning what they want and what they need. As some of you might know, one of my first big projects was the auction block exhibition that's at the museum. And when we were putting that together, we did a lot of community engagement, which looks like meeting with Black folks one-on-one in small groups and just asking them what they were looking for, what they wanted to hear, and then getting their feedback throughout the exhibition development process. So I think that listening and learning piece really can't be overstated. It's the key to all of our work, but especially for white folks in kind of in wanting to be involved in this history. And then finally, I've talked about this a lot, but one of the foundational tenets of my museum practice is care for Black people. So when we're doing this work, making sure that that is at the forefront of our minds, that this isn't just about doing public history just for the sake of doing it. It's to care for Black people who are here now and care for our ancestors. And so I hope that that's kind of helpful in getting started, although I know that there's lots more that we could talk about in terms of white folks' role in this work.
So sort of building off of the scope and depth of your research, and by the way, you answered the question that I was about to ask you about the research process. You anticipated my question. Our next question is, you've made a great case for ways that our area is reflective of larger trends in American history, i.e. slavery, the Civil War, the long civil rights movement. Do you see any ways that the history of African Americans in our region challenges or forces us to reconsider these narratives we often tell on a national scale?
That's a really great question. I haven't gotten a question like that before. Thank you. Yes, I think Fredericksburg is certainly, it certainly demonstrates many larger trends in American history. I think there's a couple of things that I've noticed so far. Again, I'm pretty new to the area, but some things I've noticed so far that are a little bit different than the way that we think about these kind of this national history. The first is free Black people. So there were, a good amount of free Black people here during the period of enslavement. I've talked about the De Baptiste, but there are several other ones. And it seems to me that some of them were very prominent in the community. John De Baptiste has several newspaper articles that we found about him. He made a lot of good money from his businesses. And it seems like the family was very prominent. And so I think this dispels some kind of beliefs about free Black people, that they weren't able to kind of create businesses, carve out lives for themselves. Obviously, I'm not saying that Virginia and that Fredericksburg were super hospitable to them, but I think it's been really fascinating to learn about the incredible accomplishments of some of these free Black folks during a period when living here must not have been very easy for them. I think something that I'm still thinking about, I haven't really been able to delve into the research yet, but I think for a city like Fredericksburg, which is a small city with a tight-knit community, there are close relationships between Black folks and white folks in ways that I don't know if I've seen in lots of other places. And what I'd like to kind of think about more is what that looked like. So somebody like Joseph Walker, who I mentioned was a sexton at St. George's Episcopal Church for so long, how did he manage to kind of make those connections, those relationships? What did that look like for him? Did it require a certain performance from him in order to kind of be embedded in those spaces? I don't know the answer to these questions yet, but there's some I'm thinking about because it seems clear to me that there are these like kind of interracial relationships that work a little bit differently than in bigger cities or in more rural places in the South. So that's something that I'm really thinking about. I feel like there was one more thing that I wanted to bring up. Oh, I think the auction block is a very, very specific Fredericksburg story. I think the way that it remained for so long, the way that people talked about it, the way that it was constantly kind of an object of dispute, and then the way that the Fredericksburg City Council, led by Vice Mayor Charlie Fry, went about doing these community conversations is so different than other places and is actually really incredible. I think, it's not distant history. This is a very recent history, but it's a very interesting case of a city trying to really reckon with these histories of racism and pain in a very public and very considered way. So I think that's something else that is worth noting when you're thinking about Fredericksburg history versus national history.
And speaking of public reckoning with slavery and memorials, what are your views on taking down Confederate monuments and replacing them with Black monuments versus erecting Black historical markers and statues in order to tell the whole story?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this. There are probably many more people that would be more qualified to talk about this than I am. I think Fredericksburg is super fascinating because there aren't Confederate monuments the way that there are in other places throughout the South, like even in Richmond. Obviously, there's the Confederate cemetery, but not the monuments in the same way. The closest Fredericksburg really had was the auction block, which isn't a monument in any way. It's an artifact. I definitely think adding more historical markers is really important. So actually, that's one of my jobs here in Fredericksburg. I'm responsible for inventorying the wayside panels that are throughout the city. I have an amazing committee that's helping me work on this that includes several professors from UMW, and then suggest new stories to tell throughout the city, especially related to Black history, but also related to Indigenous history, women's history. And so I think there is a lot of value in that. I know it's not going to fix everything, but I do think there's value in that. I think it's important to acknowledge the history of these Confederate monuments that were put up, in this concerted effort in the early 20th century and what that looks like. And I don't know if just replacing them is actually going to fix anything, but I do think adding more record of Black stories, Black individuals on the physical landscape is really important. And it's something that I feel really proud to get to be working on here in Fredericksburg.